Started here. The first thing we'll do is, if you guys haven't done this to your projects yet, we'll do kind of a bit of a I mean, this is kind of tied to lighting, but this is a setting that you guys should toggle on for all of your maps. It's something called distance field AO, and I know we've talked about that before last semester specifically, but if you guys haven't toggled this on for your maps yet, this will just give you a bit of extra screen space ambient occlusion. Okay, we're gonna go up to settings, and we're gonna go to project settings. Settings and project settings. Then on the left side of our screen here, under the engine section, we're gonna go to rendering. Okay, under lighting, we're gonna toggle on generate mesh distance fields. Okay, then you're gonna get a prompt to say you need to restart to apply the settings. So we're gonna hit restart now. Okay, so once it restarts, at the bottom of your screen, you're gonna see building mesh distance fields. Okay. That setting is not on yet in our levels. We're gonna have to select the skylight, and then you're gonna set your skylight to movable. All right. Now what this does, okay, after we set the skylight to movable, I'm gonna go up to show, visualize, distance field, ambient occlusion. Okay, so this is the layer of AO that it's going to be adding to your level. All right, if we go to show, visualize, mesh distance fields, and toggle off distance field ambient occlusion, basically this is what it's doing. It's taking a look at your level, all right, and it's generating a thickness map based on your camera. So you guys generate thickness maps in Substance Painter when you're baking. It basically adds a layer of ambient occlusion based on how thick the object is. All right, it's just an extra little layer of polish that you get in your map. It's especially good if you have vegetation in your map. So I'm going to go back to visualize, and I'm just going to turn off visualize my distance fields. Okay, and again here, that's off and that's on. Okay. All right, I'm going to go File, Save All. Let's go into 3ds Max. All right, I'm going to expand this window here. I'm going to create a plane and just give it a size of, let's say, maybe 225 by 225. Hit F4 so you can see the edge frame overlay. Center this plane on the grid. I'm just going to hit G to hide my grid. Now, what I want with this is I want to give it, I just want to give the plane enough tessellation. Okay, so I want to give the plane enough geometry so that I can blend nice and clean in UE4. All right, so what I'm going to do here under length and width segments is I'll set it to, like, let's say 12 by 12, something like that. Okay, I'm going to right click, convert to editable poly. Okay, 12 by 12 segments, converted to editable poly. Then I'm going to go up to File, Export, Selected. I'm going to put it on the desktop, I'm going to call this ground underscore 01. And I'm going to export with my usual settings, smoothing groups, tangents, and binormals, and preserve edges. And then I'm going to hit OK. In UE4, we can go ahead and close this settings window. In UE4, just click this button here so you can toggle your side panel just so that we have our folder hierarchy easily accessible. And then in here in the parent content folder, let's create a new folder. Right click, new folder. We'll call this sample content. In sample content, I'm going to import that ground plane. I do not want to import materials or textures. Okay, I don't want to import those because we're going to create our own, and I'll hit import. I'll drag this ground plane into the scene. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and delete all these other objects out of the scene. So all I have is this ground plane. All right, all I have is this ground plane.
Sorry, bad throat today.
Okay. Let's go into starter content. Textures. Starter content textures. Now look at my screen here, okay? Just look at my screen for a sec. I'm gonna select these three textures, okay? Just look at my screen and then we'll do this together. So these three textures here, right?
What are they called?
These three, cobblestone, pebble, and then look at my screen. I'm gonna drag, drop them into sample content, and I'm gonna click copy here. I'm going to do the same for water underscore N, which is down at the bottom of the textures folder. I'm going to drag it and drop it into sample content and click copy here. So now in sample content, I should have these four textures. 3 of them are the cobblestone, and 1 of them is the water normal. Good so far? So basically we copied over the 3 cobblestone textures, the color map, the mask map, and the normal map, and we also copied over the water normal. Okay, so first we're going to start to set up the material for the blend. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to right click in the sample content folder and I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to call that capital MAT underscore ground blend underscore 01. That name is just kind of random. Could be whatever you want that is indicative of what that actual material does. Right now we're just blending a ground, but if you wanted to blend cobblestone specifically, you would have the material be cobblestone blend perhaps. Right now we're just kind of testing the blend, so that's why we just named it ground blend. So I'm going to go into that material, and in this material here, I'm going to drag and drop the 3 cobblestone textures. Okay, I'm going to leave the water texture out for now, just these 3 textures. Okay, before you start to plug these textures in, there's something we need to do. All right. We need to set up a tiling controller in the back here. So I'm going to hold U on the keyboard and left click to bring in a texture coordinate. I'm going to hold M on the keyboard and left click to bring in a multiply. And I'm going to hold 1 on the keyboard and left click to bring in a constant 1 vector. Yep.
Which letter did you hold on for the texture coordinate?
U. By the way, guys, if you can't find it based on the letter that I said to hold down, just right click and type texture coordinate in the search. So I'm going to plug the texture coordinate into A. I'm going to plug the constant 1 vector into B. This constant 1 vector, I'm going to right click and convert it to a parameter. And I'm going to call this tiling controller underscore cobblestone. Set the default value to 1. And then this is going to branch into the UV slot of the 3 texture samples that you brought into the material. All right, so this is set to 1, right? Why? Why is it set to 1 by default?
It doesn't change the tiling?
So it doesn't change the tiling by default. Okay. Now, the way I like to work sometimes when I'm setting up a material, same way I like to work in Substance sometimes, is I like to block out the height first. Before I start fiddling with the color or the roughness, I want to make sure that the surface forms are strong enough on their own. Now, the reason why I like to do that is because once you start bringing in color information and specular information, and start changing the surface properties of the material, you have a bunch of other information there that might be kind of distracting you from seeing what the height is actually doing and seeing if the height is working properly on its own. Right? So before I plug in the color map, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a 3 vector, hold 3 on the keyboard and left click. Double click on that 3 vector, and I'm going to set this value to like a mid-tone gray. And I'm going to make this base color just a mid-tone gray. Then I'm going to plug in the normal map. Okay. I'm going to hold 1 on the keyboard and left click to bring in a constant vector, which I'm going to plug into the roughness. Right click, convert it to a parameter. My parameter name for this is going to be roughness. And my default value is going to be 0.9 because I want it fairly rough. It is stones after all. And I just want it to be a flat value. Like I don't want any type of change in that surface at the start. Okay. I'm going to hit save up at the top. I'm going to grab this material and drop it onto the ground plane. Okay. Now here in my material, I'm going to go to the tiling controller and I'm going to start increasing this value to something like maybe 3 or 3.5, just so that I get a good amount of tiling of that cobblestone on the ground. So like I said, that value could be whatever you want based on how much you want to tile that material. So I'll go for like 4 and I'll leave it at 4 for the tiling. I just toggled the grid off so I don't see the grid here. Okay, so we got that working. It's working for everybody. All right, now the next thing I want to do is I want to start setting up my blend so I can see how my blend works. Okay. Now we're going to be blending water puddles. All right. Now to blend water puddles, basically you want to be blending a flat surface, right? Because the top of the water is going to be flat, at least mostly. We'll bring in some undulation eventually, but basically the top of the water is going to be flat. So now if I go back into the material, okay, and I want to start to set up a way to get flatness blended into this material. All right, let's bring in a constant 3 vector. Again, hold 3 on the keyboard and left click. Now, a constant 3 vector, we want to have a flat normal map. Okay? Now, the values for a flat normal map, if I double click, in the red channel, it's 0.5. In the green channel, it's 0.5. And in the blue channel, it's 1. That gives us the color for a flat normal. Anything above or below the 0.5 on the red and green is what gives the normal map shape. It's what pushes the light in a different direction. So 0.5, 0.5, 1. Okay? Now I'm just going to slightly shift this down, and I'm going to put this 3 vector on top of the normal. So I'm going to set it up like this. Okay? This is my color way up here. Move that out of the way. My height map down here, which we're going to use in a sec. This is my normal map. Okay? All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and in the search, I'm going to type height, and I'm going to find something called a height lerp.
Heitler?
Height lerp.
Heitler?
Exactly.
I think it said Heitler. I was like, what?
That works too.
As long as you don't add a hill at the beginning, it'll be okay.
Okay. So we have this here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my stones into the B and the flat 3 vector into the A. Now the way that A and B works, okay, just so you guys understand, for all of your materials, the way the A and B works, B is always the background, A is always the foreground, just like in Substance Designer. So anytime you want to blend something onto something, the base should be B. The thing that you want to put on top of it is A. So the base is always B. All right. Now here we're looking for a transition phase. All right. That's a vertex color. So let's right click in the search. Let's type vertex color, and let's bring in this vertex color node. And we'll take the red channel into the transition phase. Height texture. Well, here it's going to be looking for a height texture. Let's take our height map, which we brought in here, and let's plug that into height texture. Okay, this is the height map that we brought in. Now, we also have a value here for contrast. All right, that's going to be a parameter. So you can just bring in a 1 vector, convert that to a parameter, name it contrast. You can leave the value at 1 for now. We'll change that value in a bit, and we'll plug that into contrast. Good so far? Now, the results of this blend setup that we just did is going to be our new normal map. So this is going to be our new normal. I'll hit save. Now I'll move this out of the way. In the level here, I'm going to go to Paint over here under the Modes panel. Paint. Okay. Look at my screen here. I'm going to toggle off all the channels that I have no information feeding into. So I only have the red channel here. Now, if you look at my screen, I'm just going to resize my brush using the square brackets. So the left square bracket to decrease the size. And I'm going to turn my strength from 0.5 to like maybe 0.2. And now holding shift, I'm going to start to paint. Okay. Now you're going to see here, as I start to do that, I'm starting to get this normal to flatten out. Right? In the material here, you remember this contrast parameter? Remember this contrast parameter? Let's turn the default value to 1. And we don't have to save because it's a parameter, it's dynamic. Now look here, because this is why we set up a height lerp. So if you look at my screen here for a sec, look up at the projector. Now if I start to paint out this area here, you can see that in some areas I'll get the stones to show. In other areas I'll get the water to show. But the water is always going to build up under the stones before it overtakes the top of the stones. So you can get, like here for example, you can get parts of the stones to pop up out of the water. Now we're going to see this a bit better in a sec. Let's go back into the material. Okay, so another thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that when we're painting the water, that the water is a smooth surface and it's not just showing the roughness of the stones all the time. Okay, so this height lerp here, I'm going to select it. I'm going to hit Control W to duplicate it. I'm going to take my roughness parameter back here. I'm just going to move it back. I'm going to select this roughness node, hit Control W to duplicate it. I'm going to call the top roughness water, and I'm going to call the bottom roughness cobble. Roughness cobble I'm going to leave at 0.9. Roughness water I'm going to set to 0. Water is going to go to A. Roughness cobble is going to go to B. Now I'm setting this up exactly the way I set these two up. I want A and B. A is always going to be water. So my roughness for A is going to be water. Transition phase, once again, is the red vertex color. Height texture is our height map. Contrast is this one vector. This is going to be my new roughness output. Good so far? Look at my screen here and duplicate this if you're having some troubles. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna hit save. So now here, if you look at my screen, as we start to blend in the water, you can see now that we're also getting the roughness to modulate. So we're getting this kind of very, very mirror-like smooth surface. And you can see here, once I start to blend the stones, you can see some of these stones are dry because they're popping up out of the water, and then these may not be fully submerged in the water. So you can get this really kind of organic looking result. Okay. All right, now let's, yep. Hold shift and paint.
Thank you.
And then just let go of shift and paint to take it to get rid of. Switch your size, your strength here to 0.2 or 0.15, just so that you're not painting with such a heavy flow on the brush. And then decrease your brush size with the square brackets. Or you can use this radius. Square brackets is the shortcut for that. Okay. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to set up a fall off. Okay, so basically around the water puddle, I want it to be wet, but I don't want it to be a puddle, right? So I want to set up a secondary blend that I can layer to get a wet fall off, so that I'm not just kind of, I don't have a puddle and then dry stones. I want to have a puddle and then wet stones and then dry stones. Okay? So I'm going to go back into the material. I'm going to move this output node a little further back. Okay, I'm going to hold 1 on the keyboard and left click to bring in a constant 1 vector. I'm going to right click, convert it to a parameter. And I'm going to call this roughness underscore wet cobble. You see where this roughness height lerp is? This is right in front of it. I'm going to duplicate this height lerp. The results of the old height lerp, okay? Guys, look at my screen here. The results of the old height lerp are going to go into B of the new height lerp. Roughness wet cobble is going to go into A.
Can you tell us how much it should be? Thinking like 0.3, 0.4?
We can just leave it at 0. You can adjust it after, tune it if you want. Transition phase. I'm going to come out of the green vertex color. So I'm going to come out of the green vertex color into transition phase. Height texture. It's going to be my height map. And we don't even need to plug in contrast here. We can just leave contrast alone, because I don't actually want contrast for this right now. And then this will be my new roughness. Okay, so guys, look here. Anytime I have red vertex color blending, it's going to be in one line. Look at my screen, guys. Anytime I have red vertex color, it's in one line. Green is in another line. Blue is in another line. Alpha is in another line if I want more blends. So I'm going to hit save. Now over here, I'm going to deselect red and I'm going to select the green vertex color. Now you can see here if I start painting, I'm going to be basically just getting the stones to appear wet, but I'm not actually going to be getting a full puddle, which is what I want. So I have this region around the water puddle which has wetness on the stones. So basically this is just a way here to kind of make sure that you blend this water puddle into the environment a bit better, so that you don't have just kind of this very binary look of this water puddle in the middle with no you know, no bleed off into the rest of the environment. And then I can go back to my red vertex color. Remember here, it's very important. If you're not gonna paint the green, uncheck it, go to your red, and then just bring in the water puddle. Okay. Let's go back into the material for a sec, and let's bring in this water normal. Let's bring in this water normal. Okay. I'm going to grab because we're going to start to kind of set up another tiling controller here for our water. I'm going to grab these nodes here, which are my initial tiling controllers. I'm going to move them up. I'm going to hit Control W to duplicate that and move it down. Okay. This tiling controller at the top here, I'm going to select these three nodes, hit C on your keyboard, and I'm going to call this tiling cobblestone. This tiling controller here, we'll name it tiling controller underscore water. Plug this into your water normal map. And then just replace your flat normal with this. This is the flat normal. This is gone now. Just replace where that flat normal was plugged in. Hit save. So let's just preview this. Okay. So now here we can see we've got this kind of undulation happening on the surface here. This is not what we're going to want to settle with, but we can see here that the normal is actually using that water normal. Yep.
Can you go back to the material for a second?
What's that?
Can you go back to the material for
The material?
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm going to want to do is I want to set up a bit of movement in the water. All right? I want to set up some kind of ambient motion in the water. All right, so let's go back to the material for a sec. Okay, I'm going to select these these 4 nodes here. The normal map plus the tiling controllers. So look at my screen. These 4 nodes. Hit Control W to duplicate those. And let me just make some space here for myself to work. Okay. So here my tiling controller is set to 4. I'm going to set it to 2. So I have one of the tiling controllers set to 2. The other one is set to 4. This is for my water, by the way, guys. Not my cobblestone. My cobblestone's up here. I'm not touching the cobblestone. This is for my water. I have one of these set to 2. One of them is set to 4. I'll just give you guys a minute to set this up. Hold L on the keyboard and left click to bring in a lerp. And then just plug these into A and B. It doesn't matter which one is which. Just go into A and B with your water normals. And then look here. I'm going to right click on the lerp and I'm going to start previewing the node. I want to take a look here at my lerp. So I just right clicked on the lerp and I clicked start previewing node, and then I just switched my preview here to the box, to the cube preview. Okay, now I've got my 2 normal maps, right? Hold P on the keyboard and left click twice to bring in 2 panners. The panners here are going to sit in between the tiling controller and the texture sample. So look here. Look at my screen. It goes into the coordinate and then out into the UV. Into the coordinate, then out into the UV. Yep.
What's that blue little node there?
It's a lerp.
Is there a river?
Yep.
It's blue because it's previewing.
You plug the normal maps into A and B, and then you right click on the lerp and hit start previewing node. So guys, look at my screen here. I'm going to pause the video. I'm just going to let you guys catch up. So I panned one of them in one direction on speed Y. The other one I panned in another direction at speed Y. Now, the results of this lerp, I'm going to right click and stop previewing the node. The results of this lerp is going to be my new water normal. And then I'm going to hit save. Now in the map here, you should start to see some rippling on your water. Yep. Now that you have this working, you can go in and start to tune the actual speed of the water. Okay, so if you want it to move faster, slower. Another thing that I'd like to add, let's go back to the material for a sec. And I'm actually going to grab these nodes here, right, before the normal. I'm going to grab these nodes, hit C, and I'm going to call this tiling water. So that includes the panner. Okay. Another thing that I like to add is sometimes your normal might be too strong, right? Like it might be like, not that the speed is too strong, but the actual normal map itself might be too bumpy. Let's say, right? Like it might not be the case for you, but let's just say your normal map is too bumpy. Like you don't want it to be that strong of a normal. What you could do at the end of this lerp here. Okay, by the way, are you guys all okay so far? Is anyone falling behind? You sure? Good so far? Okay. So after this lerp here, I'm going to right click and I'm going to bring in a flatten normal. Flatten normal. So basically where this is going to go, look here. After I lerp these two waters together, right? After I lerp these two waters, I just lerp them together. I'm going to go into a flatten normal. The flatness value here, this flatness value, I'm going to bring in a constant 1 vector, convert it to a parameter. I'm going to call this water flatness. I'm going to plug this into the flatness. You can leave the value at 0. And then I'm going to put this into my new, this is going to be my new water. So basically, this is just like, it's kind of a filter that it's going to go through. I'm either going to use it or not. Right now it's at 0, so we're not using it. Does this make sense here, this thing that we just added? All this is going to do is it's going to decrease the strength of the normal map. So look at my screen. Look, guys, just look at my screen and stop what you're doing for a sec. Okay, I'm just gonna explain this so we understand. I have two tiling controllers because I have two water normal maps. I want to basically tile them at different sizes, and then I want to pan them at different speeds opposing each other. Okay? If my normal is too strong, I'm going to go through this flattened normal so that I have control over the strength of that normal map. And then it's my blend. Okay? So now in the map here, this flatness value, if I turn it to like 0.6, I'm going to hit save. So now here for my default value, if I turn this flatness to like 0.6, you can see how much I'm kind of toning down that effect. So look here at the water surface. This is at 0.6. That's at 0. 0.5, 0.6, 0. So I can really decrease and increase the strength. Okay, so we have this so far. Now, I want to start to kind of incorporate my actual color map now. I want to start to incorporate the color in here. And also, this panner value is a bit strong. So I'm going to go, instead of negative 0.15, I'm going to go negative 0.0, negative 0.095. Just to get a bit of a slower kind of movement to that water. Okay, let's go back to the material. Now we want to start to get our color map roughed in. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move my constant color on top here. Look here now, I'm in the color, right? Okay, so up here, I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna convert this 3 vector to a parameter. Convert this 3 vector to a parameter. Call this water color. Grab this height lerp, Control W to duplicate it. The stones are going to be B. The water color is going to be A. The transition phase is going to be the red vertex color. The height texture is going to be the same height texture we've been using. And the contrast is going to be this contrast. Now this here is going to be my new output for base color. Yep.
Contrast?
Contrast is the same contrast we've been using for the other ones. So I'm just reusing it. We're going to hit save. Now, if you look here, I can double click on that color now because it's a parameter, right? And I can just start to adjust the color. Because it's a parameter, I can view it live. So look at my screen here. So because it's a parameter, I can just start to adjust this value here for the watercolor. And I'll see the updates change dynamically. Okay. Now, this is one way to do it, right? This is one way to do it here. I'm just going to pause the video for a sec. Okay. So basically here, like I just explained, if we wanted some type of murky water, like I said, I've used this in like a forest type of environment, on like a muddy path, and it works great. You don't see through to the ground. You can tint this slight, like a sludgy kind of, brownish color, and have it blend in with your mud material or whatever material it is you're creating, and it'll work fine, right? But let's say that you want to fake some type of transparency. In this material here, what we're going to do, you see here for my my actual blend. So you see my blend here. So this is my color map, right? This is my watercolor. Now what I'm going to do, instead of doing the blend like this, right, is I'm going to hold M on the keyboard and bring in a multiply. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply my base color by the watercolor. And this is going to be my new A for the height lerp. So what am I doing here? I'm multiplying, but what is that doing? Without looking at the result. What is this doing?
It's making the base color of the cobble come through the watercolor.
Yeah, it's basically just tinting the base color. Right? So if I hit save, right? So now basically everywhere that I paint this, and I can open this up to control how much I'm multiplying it, right? Now look here, as I start to adjust this, I can say how much I want to tint my base color. And basically here, what I'm doing to kind of fake this transparency is I am darkening or I'm multiplying my base color. So depending on how deep the ground is, you can kind of select the tint that works for you. But it's basically now just kind of tuning this value.
Is there a way to fix, like, if you look at it too low, it kind of breaks the illusion? Is there anything you can really do about that?
You basically just have to adjust, like get your color working a bit better because your color is a bit too aggressive. So just tweak that color and look at the change as it's happening. Since it's dynamic, that should be live updating. So you basically just tune that color there. So another thing we want to do, remember the spots that we painted around here that made it kind of that wet fall off, right? Like here, look at my screen here. This part here is wet, right? This is wet. Okay, so what I could do here, all right, let's go back to the material for a sec. I'm gonna grab these two nodes here, these two nodes, and I'm gonna Control C, Control V to duplicate them, or Control W to duplicate. The second node here, which is called watercolor, I'm gonna rename this to fall off, wet fall off color. And then the multiply again is going to go from my base color. So look at my screen. You see here it's coming from my base color to this new multiply. But now I have this second tint here that I have control over. Give myself some space here to work. I'm going to duplicate this height lerp. The results of my first base color height lerp are going to be B. My fall off color is going to be A. Transition phase is going to be the green vertex color, because remember the fall off, the wet fall off is green. My height texture is going to be the same. And I'm not going to plug in contrast. I'm going to leave contrast alone. Yep.
Still transition.
Transition phase is on the second one is green. Remember, everything in this line is green, the second line. Everything in the first line is red. Now this is going to be my new results for my base color. So now I'm going to hit save.
And is the roughness for the cobblestone?
So now, if after you hit save, if you look at it now, basically everywhere that you start to paint your wet fall off in green, all right, you'll also get a darkening of the stones. And now this darkening here, it doesn't have to be the same darkening as your water. Like you can go into the material here, because the wet fall off we control separately, we can make this, excuse me, we can make this slightly less. So basically my wet fall off would still darken, just not quite as much as the deep puddle.
Not working for me.
What's that?
It's not working for me.
Are you in green?
Yeah, I don't know.
Are you in the green paint here?
No.
Did you plug it into your base color?
No, thanks.
So basically, yeah, just make sure you plug it in so that, just to ensure that it's working. And then you can just kind of go in and start to tune. Basically, the color is going to be tuned based on like how your lighting is, right? Like if your lighting is a certain way, it might show off better if you, you know, have your water slightly brighter or darker, depending on your situation. It's going to be kind of, you're going to be basically tweaking this right up until the end. And guys, be aware that this green vertex color is going to stamp over the red vertex color. So if you look here, if I come in and I start to paint my green, it's going to take over the red. So if I want the puddle back here, I have to make sure that I erase the green and add the red.
And all this on one plane,
Yeah, this is all just happening on the water plane.
all just one dimension. That's pretty amazing with this technology.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's go back to the material. Hold 3 on the keyboard and left click to bring in a 3 vector. Right click in the search, type component and bring in a component mask. Plug this into the mask. And I'm going to explain what these do kind of right after we wrap this up. Hold 1 on the keyboard and bring in a 1 vector, convert that to a parameter. Call this deformation and set the value to -2. Right click and in the search, look for an append vector and append A and B. Hold L on the keyboard and left click to bring in a lerp. A regular lerp, not a height lerp. Look here. This 3 vector is going to go to A. The append is going to go to B. So we're kind of reusing this. Instead of duplicating it twice, we're just reusing it. Now let's just give this some space, because this is going to be the blue vertex color is going to go into alpha. So the blue vertex color is going to be alpha. Yep.
Never mind.
Oh, sorry. Let's cross these actually. Yeah, let's cross these. Make the append the A. My bad. Let me just move this over. It's a bit messier, but I'll explain what this all does in a bit. Append is A, 000 is B.
What's your alpha again?
The blue vertex color. And here I have green. So up here I can right click. Or actually I'm going to hold C. I'm going to bring in a comment. Green. I'm not going to put anything in this comment. I'm just going to leave it up here. I'm going to duplicate this comment. Over here. It's red. I'll duplicate this comment. Over here. Blue. And then I'm just going to click on these comments. And I'm just going to switch the comment color. So just so we know what we're blending. Red, green, and blue. Okay. You okay?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right. So out of this lerp, we're going to go into world position offset. World position offset. And I'm going to hit save. Out of the lerp, we went into world position offset. Now, if I go into paint mode and I go into my blue vertex color, I hide all the other ones. If you look at my screen here, holding shift, I can start to kind of push the vertices physically downward. So basically I can make sure that everything inside this puddle is going to actually be like a little crevice where the water would actually pool. Right? Like you can physically deform. This is actually pushing the vertices down, by the way. This is it's using it's shader driven, but it's actually moving the vertices in world position. You getting that to work? Then I'm going to go in with my green, and I'm just going to kind of get my fall off working properly. I'll just go back to my fall off tint and just darken it up a bit. Okay, so let me just explain why we did that world position offset, or how we did that, for those that don't know. All right, so here basically, anytime we use world position offset, okay, RGB become XYZ. All right, anytime you're dealing with world positioning, RGB become XYZ. So what I'm doing here, okay, is I'm saying by default, don't do anything. Okay? Then up here what I'm doing is I'm taking XY and I'm isolating Z. So here mask, RG, B is masked. I'm controlling the Z independently, and I'm saying -2. So every time I paint, Now I'm blending -2 on Z. All right, and that's going into world position offset. This is more of a final polish thing. You can use it if you'd like. Again, here I'm only going down like -2. Because this is a parameter, you can see here that we can go down much further, like -8. You can see how far this is getting offset. Right? -4. This is kind of now sloping down pretty good. And it's giving me this more natural feeling puddle.